Our next speaker is Margaret Lawson, a counsellor from Alzheimer's Australia. And Margaret's going to talk to us today about strategies to manage and respond to challenging behaviours in a person diagnosed with dementia. Please welcome Margaret Lawson.
Hi everyone. My challenge is to cover such a big topic in a very short space of time. So I am going to skim the surface, but what I can do is offer you ongoing our services. So I'm hoping this is an introduction, and if there is any need, please feel free to contact us, and I've got contact details on the table. So I'm very quickly going to cover these topics. I'm grateful Renee's actually covered the brain and the brain structure and the function of the brain, but that's really important in understanding changes in behaviour in relation to someone who is living with dementia. And that's because the brain governs our functions. And so often the behavioural changes are actually directly related to the part of the brain that's being affected. So that's important to remember. The other take-home message, if you like, is that the person with dementia really has very little control over some of those behaviours. And so it's not them, it's the dementia. And this is a really fundamental way of helping people cope with what can be some very challenging behavioural changes as a result of someone experiencing dementia. So as you can see, dementia is actually an umbrella term, and as Renee said, there's something like over 100 different brain diseases that can result in the symptoms of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common, but there's also more commonly vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, mixed dementia and frontotemporal dementia. So they're the ones that we primarily see, but there are actually over 100 different brain diseases that can cause the symptoms of dementia. Dementia can affect the way we think, our cognitive function, as Renee's already gone through, how we remember, our behaviour, how we react, our spatial awareness, in other words, how we get around the world, how we navigate the world, and how we speak. So how we learn, how we remember. It's really, really fundamental, isn't it? When you think about us as humans, it affects everything. So I'll just go back. So I'm just going to pick a couple of things here. As Renee was talking about with the frontal lobe here, it's around executive function. So just have a think for a minute. This also governs our inhibitions. One of the things that can be most distressing for people caring for someone with dementia is what we call disinhibited behaviour. This is where people who were very polite, perhaps, very even conservative type people, all of a sudden become very vocal and say inappropriate things in public or do inappropriate things and really embarrass us. Or they can embarrass themselves. That behaviour, which can be quite distressing, is actually as a result of changes in the frontal lobe. So again, it's not them, it's actually the dementia. The other one, for example, in the temporal lobes, as Renee was talking about, around language and also comprehension of language. So someone could be really have been quite articulate, but the dementia has changed that, so they're unable to articulate what's wrong, what's going on. So for example, if you're in pain and you can't articulate that you're feeling pain, you may say you have a toothache, you may become very protective of your face. Now, we can interpret that behaviourally, or we can have someone say, I've got a toothache, I need to get to the dentist. If I've lost my language, I can't say, I have a toothache, I need to get to the dentist, but I'm still experiencing the pain. So behavioural changes can be related to what's going on for us medically, I might be thirsty, I might be in pain, but pain's a big one where people might become quite defensive, or they might become withdrawn, or they might look distressed, but in fact they're underlying that there's pain. So again, it's not the person themselves is not able to control that. They can't articulate, they can't tell you anymore what's going on. So I've got on your tables, there's a whole list of changed behaviours. There's a page that looks like that. We've built this up over time from people who have attended our counselling sessions or our family information and support sessions. And this is a very typical list. It's not exhaustive, and it doesn't mean that every person with dementia experiences all of these. We're very individual. The changes to our brain is individual, and the progression, we can't predict exactly where within the brain it's going to be affected in all types of dementia. But as you see, it's quite a big list. So what we start off doing in terms of providing strategies for people is try to sort out what's really important here. So the first is there a risk associated with the behaviour? A risk might be someone, and I've got an example here of one of our volunteers whose husband had Alzheimer's disease. He was a bushwalker, loved bushwalking. He loved walking. And it got to the point where, unfortunately, he went walking one day and didn't come back. He was out overnight, and it was really, really frightening for him and for his partner, his wife. And so there needed to be a change in the environment to enable him to stay safe. There was a risk associated with that behaviour. He couldn't stop it. People with dementia cannot necessarily stop the behaviour. They can't do it themselves because of the changes in the brain. So she actually needed to provide an environment that kept him safe. That was a risk. Some other behaviours, though, are more about our own feelings of frustration or in being annoyed or being tired. And a great example of that is repetitive questioning. Yeah, I can see some nodding. It's very common. And the issue is it's not a risk, but man, it can wear you down. Yeah, it really wears you down. But it's not a risk behaviour. So there are other strategies we can use. So sometimes you need to choose about what you're going to focus on because you can't do everything all the time. So what we suggest is certainly focus on the risk behaviours initially. If there aren't any, then certainly look to actually providing some solutions around what's becoming frustrating. So as I've said, most behaviours are caused by the dementia and the person actually can't control that. Now the other thing that I've handed out is a sheet with this, what we call the caused model on it. And the caused model is used by us and many services, in fact, that help with behavioural strategies. And the first is communication. So if someone has lost their language, then it's very difficult to communicate using words. So the way that we communicate with people who are living with dementia is very important. Body language, pitch, tone are all really important, more important in fact than the words, because people can still pick up on those signals and signs even though they have dementia. So if you're frowning and scowling and going, "Arr," then that can be picked up. Communication can also be around providing an environment that gives cues to the people. In other words, so if someone is in a kitchen and all the cupboards are solid wood or laminate, you can't see through the cupboard to see where the cups are, but guess what? The memory's no good. So a person with Alzheimer's, for example, might come into a kitchen and stand in the middle thinking, I wonder where the cups are, because they can't remember. So we recommend if you're going to have a dementia-friendly kitchen, you actually have glass fronts or perspex fronts to your cupboards, but most people can't afford that because we've already got our cupboards built. So the idea is to use symbols or signs. So you might have, in fact, a picture of a cup and a saucer laminated and put on the front of the cupboard where they are. It gives a visual cue. It's around providing a different type of communication than just the words, because the person can't rely on their memory anymore. The memory's not working. So we set up an environment to provide them with external cues to give them the best opportunity to live as well as they can for as long as they can. The next one is activities. So if we're setting people up to fail, then it's not a great experience, both for us as carers, but also certainly for the person living with dementia. So activities can be scaled to suit the person's need. It is important to keep active. It's important to do things that are purposeful and enjoyable if you have dementia. A good example of this is a client once talked to me about her dad. He had Alzheimer's disease. He had worked hard all his life, very physical. He was living with her and he decided that he was going to pull out he's going to do a favour for the street, so he's going to pull out all the bins, the wheelie bins every day, which he did. Every day for a few weeks he went along the street, went into people's yards and pulled out the wheelie bins, thinking he was being helpful. The neighbours, got a bit jack of that. That wasn't great. So what she did was actually she was very clever and creative around this. She got some plastic leaves. She made a big bag of leaves, threw them in the backyard, gave her dad a rake, and he had a purposeful job every day. The leaves got raked up, put back in the bag, put back in the garage, and out they came the next day. So her dad had a purposeful job that was meaningful to him. It matched his history. It matched his personality, where he came from, his experience. And it meant the neighbours were a lot happier as well. And our client was a lot happier. So that was actually really good. The next is the U in caused. Unwell, unmet, unhappy. So we think that some of the behavioural changes are around that, and the pain, as I said, was a good example. So if someone is experiencing pain, they may not have that met because we can't pick up on it. The language isn't there to tell us. So it's a matter of actually trying to observe what's going on for a person. So if they're withdrawing, if they're holding their face, holding a part of their body, it may be an indication that something's not right. It's worth getting it checked out. It's really worth having a great relationship with your GP, because that's where you will probably need to go with pain. Story, as I said, understanding a person's history is really, 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 really important, because it helps you to understand potentially some of what they're interpreting. So if a person's ability to process and interpret their environment is being impaired due to dementia, then having some sense of their history, their life story can be extremely helpful in providing cues. It can also give you hints and tips around what would be meaningful to them to actually help with some of the behavioural changes. And the environment we've already talked about. So actually setting up the physical environment to ensure that it gives the person the best opportunity. This includes things like going to noisy shopping malls, for example. Going to Chadstone for me is a great challenge because it's so big, there's so much going on. A person who has dementia will find something like Chadstone really overwhelming because their processing speed has slowed down. They can't scan the environment, and we do it in an instant. We're not even conscious of what we're doing when we're actually processing our environmental situation. A person with dementia will really struggle. Noise, lots of people talking, big conversations where they can't keep track, and you'll see people withdraw. It's very common to see people withdraw from big groups because they can't keep track. So making sure the environment is more suited to their need when you can't always do it, but when you can is great. In other words, quieter, one-on-one, face level, actually facing the person you're talking to, not coming at them from behind and scaring them because they can't actually interpret what's going on. So, the first step is really about observing and identifying any behaviours that you're particularly concerned about. So it's trying to get specific. And then we think the best way is, and you can do this on the back of a match box. You don't have to write a big essay about it, and you can do it in your head. But it's really important to understand, are there any triggers to what's going on? Where does it occur? Is it specific to the bathroom? Is it specific to where there's a big hallway mirror and where the person with dementia, every time they walk down that hallway, they start to wobble or become unstuck? It may be related to the mirror. They're seeing someone in the mirror they're not recognising. It's them, but they don't recognise themselves. So it's important to really think about where. The next is what time of day. Sometimes some of the behavioural changes are related to a time of day. A very well-known one is called shadowing or sundowning. And this is where at the end of a working day, people can become quite agitated. And we think that's related to, particularly for women, who at the end of a working day would be getting ready, kids for bed, kids feeding, might have the washing on, and all of a sudden they've got nothing to do and they know they should be doing something but not sure what it is. Who else is around? Is there something around the people? In other words, are there 40 people at a big function and that's where the behaviour occurs, or is it one-on-one? And how? The how. So how does the person behave and how do others? In other words, if a person is becoming agitated or aggressive, the person with dementia, if you respond in kind or highly anxious, you kind of get this mirroring effect whereby it just escalates. One of the big things around behavioural changes where there's agitation or aggression or anxiousness is to remain calm. And that can be very hard. And I know you're doing a session on mindfulness later on, worth its weight in gold. So it's actually remaining calm, and you can bring down the heat. You can actually bring it down. So people with dementia can mirror you. You get anxious, they get anxious. They don't know why they're getting anxious, but they can read your body language and then decide what the triggering might be. You may never find out all the answers to all of these questions, but it's worth giving it a go. And then think about the communication, the activity, the unmet needs. Is the person unwell? Their personal story. Is there something in their personal experience that seems to be triggering this? Their environment. And then the type of dementia they may have. So people with dementia with Lewy body don't necessarily have the memory issues that someone with Alzheimer's has. So it is important to understand the underlying brain disease because that can really give you some clues about what's going on. Then you need to decide how best to respond, and the fact that you know the person will give you the best clues. You often will know better than most what works and what doesn't work. So summing up, the changes are related to dementia. They're not the person trying to give you a hard time, even though sometimes it feels like that. It can feel very personal at times, but it's not. Try to focus on the changed behaviour, not the emotional response. And not everything's a risk, so you don't necessarily need to tackle all behavioural change. In other words, try and get the person back to where they were before the dementia, because that's not going to work either. But there will be some times where you definitely need to take a break. Respite is extremely important. And sometimes with the behavioural stuff, so for example, repetitive questioning, you may need to step out of the room because you just need to give your head a rest. And that's okay. You need to look after yourselves as well. Think about the cause model and what the behaviour might mean. The behaviour may be telling you something. The person has pain, they're thirsty, they're hungry, there may be something behind the behavioural change. Talk it over if you've got someone to talk to, and then decide how to respond. Now you will potentially, people get quite good at this, and family carers actually can do this in a heartbeat. Sometimes, certainly in the beginning, it can be quite a struggle, and you have to get used to using these techniques. So we've got services available. We actually are in for the long haul. Our services are free to family carers. We provide individual counselling, we provide family counselling, we provide programs, living with programs for people with the diagnosis and their primary carer. They're group programs. We provide a memory lane cafe that provides a nice and social gathering for people with the diagnosis and their loved one or a family member or a friend. We have many resources, and I've actually put over on the table a booklet about our services, but also one of our help sheets around change behaviours. We have lots and lots of help sheets around a lot of information. So you can access those through our National Dementia Helpline, which is 1800 100 500. It's on all our material. Or you can go online and access stuff online as well, and that's free online. Another really important service in Victoria around behavioural change, when the behavioural change becomes very problematic, is DBMAS. So this is the Dementia Behaviour Management Advisory Service. They're on the telephone and they do run 24 hours a day. So we work in conjunction with DBMAS, and so some clients use both our services, and that's great. It's perfect. And they can certainly help with the more challenging and really problematic behavioural changes. They also use the cause model, so it's good because there's a consistency there. And they're a free call. So finally, just to say, I can't change the person with dementia, and they can't change. The dementia is at play. But what I can do is change my response. And this is where family carers need to be the flexible ones around, if you like, the immovable object, which is the dementia. We have the cognitive capacity to actually do that flexibility. The person with dementia is slowly losing that ability to be flexible and able to problem solve, etc. So thank you for listening. There are some handouts over on the table as well.